Hearing the plea for aid sent a shiver down Jessica's spine. 2 years have gone since her son's mysterious death, and she recently paid her respects at his cemetery. She had been coming here on a regular basis since then, and this was the first time she had ever heard anything like it. When Jessica realized whose voice had cried for assistance, she was shocked. While heading in that way, Jessica took particular note of the source of the distress call. There was no way she could ignore this, even if she had no clue who or what may be there. There was no doubt in her mind that if her late son Mark had been here, he would have offered assistance. That stoked her drive just enough. Thanks. But what she didn't anticipate was how much Mark was involved, or that Mark wanted Jessica to be the one to hear his call for assistance. Jessica almost dropped to her knees in amazement when she realized who had yelled. To see this person again was the last thing she anticipated. Someone walked up to Jessica and touched her on the shoulder. "I'll break it all down for you." Who, however, had been auditioning for Jessica's assistance? And why? And what role did her son Mark's unsolved death play? Despite the passage of more than 2 years, Jessica's grief over the loss of her son showed no signs of abating. It was promised that things would grow less difficult with time. After 20 years of raising and loving her son, Jessica knew she would never get over losing Mark. However, she did learn one surprising fact. Jessica was shocked to find that she was having such a hard time in other areas of her life. Her life had been dull since Mark's death. Numerous changes had occurred, but she just lacked the strength to give a hoot. Then there was what had transpired between her and her husband. After Mark's passing, Jessica and her husband attempted to remain together, but eventually split up. Jessica seemed like a completely different person now. It was time for them to make a tough choice concerning their marriage's future. Eventually, Jessica's husband decided to seek a divorce. Since she could empathize with his predicament, she wasn't upset with him. It pained her to think that she couldn't be there for him when he needed her most, but they were both too preoccupied with their own feelings of loss to be of any use. There were other signs that Jessica was losing her footing at the same time. Jessica was able to take time off from work to sort out her life because of the company's generous policy. However, after a while, they were no longer able to hide her. They wanted her to make a decision on whether or not she would go back to work, and she put it off for far too long. As soon as they asked, Jessica provided the correct response. When Jessica was unhappy in her previous position, she decided to quit. She was unable to give her all to her career or marriage, while Mark was away. When comparison to everything she had lost, her concerns appeared trivial. However, there was still one thing that encouraged her to wake up and start her day. Going to see Mark's grave became a regular habit for Jessica. Daily, she made an effort to go at the same time. The visits provided her a sense of purpose, and they were the one thing she looked forward to every morning. In spite of the solace it afforded her, her routine also had some undesirable consequences. Jessica told herself that going to see Mark every day was beneficial because it forced her out of bed and into the world. This was one of the few occasions on which she felt the need for a breath of outside air. However, this also served as a continual reminder of what Jessica had given up for good. Jessica felt the need to make some changes to her routine. After visiting Mark's cemetery, Jessica fought against the urge to sob. Her mind wandered to the many wonderful times she and Mark had spent together while he was still living. Nonetheless, there were occasions when she couldn't help but reflect on his absence, and it brought up certain concerns that kept Jessica up at night. Jessica was eager for details concerning Mark's passing. She had hoped that additional knowledge would help her feel more at ease, but there was only so much she could learn. In addition, She was skeptical that anything new would have appeared after so much time had passed. However, Mark's passing was not typical in any way. Given the complexity of the events leading up to Mark's death, Jessica isn't sure she ever will. He had gone out for the evening and never returned. In spite of her best efforts, the more information she gathered, the less she appeared to know. Then there came the time of looking for it. The nearby woodlands had been combed by the police, and a group of volunteers after Mark went missing. Mark hadn't been seen in a whole week, but Jessica still hoped he'd wander off or wind up at the hospital. When they located Mark, he had already gone away. Yet how? The authorities began looking into Mark's death to rule out the possibility that it was a murder. However, after a thorough examination, they still couldn't prove anything. They came up with many potential explanations, but ultimately accepted one. The investigation concluded that Mark had committed suicide and was not the victim of a crime or murder. Jessica was certain that the authorities were mistaken. The thought that her kid would do anything like that was completely foreign to her, but there were certain undeniable truths that she couldn't contest. Just before he passed away, Jessica had observed that Mark was behaving distant and strange. It had been going on for weeks, yet he still refused to address the issue with her. Jessica expected that he would soon come to his senses. There was one aspect of her connection with Mark, she was certain, that would remain constant. In her heart, Jessica knew she would have known if Mark was suicidal. She thought he would have told her if he was feeling down if he was. After all, Jessica loved Mark very much and would have done anything for him. One aspect of Mark's death became gradually acceptable to Jessica. Jessica began to realize that there were no simple solutions as time went on. She even started to make peace with the unanswered questions surrounding Mark's death. She never imagined that her daily visit to Mark's grave would result in a chance meeting that would alter the course of her life forever. It was a normal day as Jessica woke up and prepared to visit Mark's cemetery. She liked going first thing in the morning, before any other funerals or guests showed up. It was relaxing to be alone with her thoughts for a while. However, that day would be everything from tranquil. After making it to Mark's grave, Jessica prepared to spend some quiet time with her friend. To keep from lingering on the fact that she would never again have a meaningful talk with her kid, she forced herself to think solely of the bright side of things. As she was planning what she would say to Mark if she could only have a chance, she heard a scream rip through the air. Jessica's amazement caused her to spring to her feet. She turned to check who or what may have made the noise, but saw no one in sight. After exploring the neighborhood, she began to question whether or not she had dreamed the whole thing. However, it didn't seem to make any sense at all. A crystal-clear voice had been heard. By the second time she heard a voice, Jessica knew it was a yell. She gave careful attention in an attempt to pinpoint the source of the sound. She could make out the female voice pleading for assistance in the background. It was clear to Jessica that she needed further information. Where did you hear that someone was in danger? Jessica decided to find out what was going on, so she left to do so.
Also, if you have not done so already, please subscribe to our channel and click that notification bell to get inspired by these real-life stories every day. Now, back to the story.
A lot of time had passed at the cemetery without her hearing anybody in distress. She had to go around graves and trees, which meant she had to travel a circuitous route. But there was something that spurred her on to maximum haste. Whoever had put out the cry was definitely in a state of terror, as Jessica could tell. It wasn't the sound of someone sobbing or being distraught at a gravesite. When she reached a patch of shrubs, she chose not to go around them, but rather to cut in between them. That decision would affect every aspect of life. Jessica was hardly unnoticeable to an outside observer due to the density of the vegetation. She was almost inside the door when she realized the source of the noise. Suddenly, she was relieved that the bushes were there to hide her. A realization of her error caught Jessica off guard. In the end, it didn't seem that anybody was in danger. That individual who was yelling had to be a member of the bigger group that was gathered. Jessica believed it was a funeral since everyone was wearing black. Something wasn't quite right, however. Jessica had arrived to the cemetery at what seemed like an extraordinarily early hour for a burial, but she had not seen a procession pass by. What's more, she didn't see any open graves or awaiting coffins when she had a look around. Jessica remained watching in the hopes that something would reveal itself to her. After the lady had yelled, Jessica lost sight of her. She waited in the bushes for additional information about the group's activities. She became quite positive that no one required assistance after some time had passed, but she couldn't escape the lingering suspicion that something was amiss. Jessica, concerned, opted to just inquire if anybody needed anything before leaving the group alone, if they said they were okay. Perhaps they had additional information about who was making all the noise. She was about to emerge from the bushes when she caught a glimpse of their features. In the end, it wasn't a funeral. The black-clad individuals all had full-face masks. Jessica had been paying less attention before, but now that she saw that they weren't dressed appropriately for a funeral in all black. Hooded garments were substituted with the usual business attire. I mean, why were they there exactly? Jessica struggled to decide what she ought to do. She wasn't sure whether she should get involved since the folks seemed shady, and yet she didn't want to abandon anybody who may be in danger by staying behind. No viable option presented itself. After much thought, Jessica realized she had to take action. Jessica didn't want to leave a lady in danger simply because she was worried for her own safety, so she decided not to go. As Jessica deliberated, she saw some activity near a tomb. There was just one massive mausoleum in the whole cemetery. Jessica gasped as a lady in all white emerged from the vehicle and walked up to the group. Two of the other persons in black clothes joined her. Jessica almost let out a loud scream when she saw the woman's face, as if the story itself weren't ridiculous enough. It was hard for Jessica to imagine that she really knew the lady. It had been a long time since they'd last seen one other, but she was certain it was the same person. Having reached a dead end, Jessica was at a loss. Now that there were more people than before, she began to consider her alternatives again. There's no way she could ever escape danger from them. Jessica considered making a phone call to the police and letting them deal with it. Anything that went wrong wouldn't derail their efforts since they were prepared for it and would have assistance from others who had also received training. This made a lot more sense than Jessica going up against the whole gang by herself. She took her phone slowly out of her pocket. Jessica's fear of the unfamiliar group caused her to nearly drop her phone. In her haste to do so, she pressed the incorrect button, locking the screen in its unlocked state. Even though she had put the phone down and halted the music, the controls were still in view. Instantaneously, the volume on her music increased dramatically. Towards the first sound of the music, everyone turned around to gaze into the distance at the bushes. Jessica could not possibly have not been spying on them. She considered escaping, but there were too many graves and trees to outrun her pursuers in the cemetery. Sighing, she gave up and walked out into plain sight. The group's suspicion that Jessica was spying on them made Jessica fear for her safety. Could have been recording them without their knowing it. She had no idea what the individuals in black were doing around the tomb, but she got the impression that they didn't want an audience. What would they possibly do to her? As fear gripped Jessica, She found herself unable to take a deep breath. Once a minute had gone without anybody rushing at her, though, she began to relax. Some of the participants took off their disguises. Although they did not seem hostile, Jessica still did not feel safe among them. She avoided getting too close and hid in the bushes instead. Then she saw the white-clad lady. The white-clad lady got to her feet and walked up to Jessica. The woman's expression betrayed her happiness at seeing her. She was beaming. Nobody seemed to think it was weird that they were there. The lady asked Jessica a question she couldn't answer when she finally got to her. She was curious as to why Jessica had been lurking in the bushes and keeping an eye on them. Jess was nervous to speak out in front of everyone, but she did not want to lie about responding to the screams for assistance she'd heard. Her best-case scenario was that this was all a big miscommunication. The lady seemed to get the concept right away. She explained to Jessica that her shrieks weren't for assistance, but rather about damnation. Jessica, from that far away, clearly misunderstood. This lady began to describe what was happening by pointing to the others standing behind her. It was inconceivable to Jessica. The lady said they were all there to assist the dead make it to paradise via a rite. They continued to meet once a month to perform the same thing, with the intention of saving more lives. When Jessica found out what they were up to, she was shocked. In her experience, cemeteries were always quiet. It made sense, however, given her familiarity with the lady. One of Jessica's therapists was the lady in white. During Jessica's time of grief over the loss of her son, she had been there to provide comfort. She was pious and had often expressed her desire to pray for Jessica's son's salvation. If such was the case, however, who were the mysterious black figures? The white-clad lady added that everyone else there had just lost a close friend or family member. They hoped that by taking part in the ceremony, they might help the departed souls find peace, even though they weren't 100% sure the ceremony would work. Everyone felt happier and more at ease after it. The white-clad lady had other reasons for being there. The woman's career as a counselor reflected her selfless dedication to her clients. She found great joy in helping grieving families finally let go of their loved one and move on with their lives. She felt a responsibility to help people in need, and saw doing so as essential to her mission. Jessica was taken aback by how hearing the woman's tale affected her. When Jessica was through talking to the group, she returned to the cemetery where her son was laid to rest. She felt the burden of her melancholy lift from her shoulders as she drove home. She prayed the white woman's group included her son's spirit on its way to paradise as she contemplated her.